It is not right that we have to be here in 1993 debating what to give American citizens living right here in the shadow of the Capitol the right to be represented in Congress, to give D.C. statehood.
Well, I want everybody to know that there are conservative and liberal advocates on both sides of this issue with regard to the District of Columbia. There are 600,000 people in the District of Columbia never contemplated by the founders of this country to be without the right to vote.
This bill allows our country to live up to its claim to be a democracy. We stand out as the only democracy which denies democracy to the residents of its own capital.
DC is home to more than 700,000 mostly Black and brown Americans who for more than 200 years have been denied their right to participate in our democracy. DC residents are subject to the laws of this country, and they pay more federal taxes than residents in 22 other states. Congress must act swiftly. Statehood for the District of Columbia and the full representation of its residents is essential. Call your senators at 202-224-3121 and urge them to support S51, the Washington, D.C. Admissions Act. Let's make D.C. statehood a reality.
Good evening. Welcome to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund's roundtable discussion regarding statehood for the District of Columbia. Tonight, we will discuss the civil rights implications for statehood and why the time is long overdue for granting full suffrage to the nation's capital. We are honored to be joined by the Honorable Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, who has represented the District of Columbia in the House of Representatives for almost 30 years. We are also delighted to have the Mayor of the District of Columbia with us this evening, the Honorable Mayor Muriel Bowser. Mayor Bowser has served as Mayor of Washington, D.C. since 2015 and is the first woman ever re-elected as the Mayor of Washington, D.C., and the first mayor to earn a second term in 16 years. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by the President and Director-Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Sherrilyn Ifill. Ms. Ifill is the 7th President and Director-Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund and the second woman to lead the organization. Ms. Ifill is a lifelong civil rights lawyer and has led LDF since 2013.
Thank you all for joining us for this important conversation about DC statehood and civil rights. And obviously we're thrilled to be joined by the expert, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. We hope that Mayor Muriel Bowser will be able to join us in this conversation, but we are going to go ahead and really begin to grapple and wrestle with this important issue. Before we jump into it, I have to say about Congresswoman Holmes Norton that her tireless advocacy on this issue is well known, as is her deep connection to the district. And I think I want to start there. I really want to start with your family connection to the district. I've heard you talk about this a bit before, and I think it's important for our audience to hear that connection because the arc of that story is important to the larger story about DC.
Well, I thank you for that. And I'm pleased to just say a word about my own family. I'm a third generation Washingtonian, but my great grandfather was a runaway slave from Virginia. That's how we got to the District of Columbia. Planted roots here. My grandfather was a DC firefighter. Every time I go past the fire station, I'm pleased. Of course, the firefighters, like everything else in the district, was segregated. So he was in one of the few Black firefighters, and he was in an all-Black fire company here. So the Holmes family was planted long ago here in the District of Columbia, and I don't intend to go anywhere.
So you have been deeply entrenched in the district, and you've seen the arc of this conversation about DC statehood. I want to talk for a minute about DC itself. this is a jurisdiction with a population of 700,000 people that lacks representation at the federal level beyond your participation in the United States Congress. And I wondered if you could just say something about that. First of all, the arc of the conversation around DC statehood and what it means for 700,000 people in the United States to not have full representation from your perspective.
Well, there are no other Americans who pay federal taxes who don't have the same rights as other Americans. The people that you are talking to, the people I represent, pay the highest federal taxes per capita, don't have a voting representative in the House. Now, I do vote in committee. I chair subcommittee. I can do everything that any other member does, except what is expected, and that is to vote on final legislation. The district is even more handicapped by having no vote, no one in the Senate to represent the district. So I have had to find allies, and fortunately I have, even on my statehood bill, who will support me when I get a matter through the district. I was voted, there is a website that keeps track of members getting bills passed in the House, and I was voted the most productive member in the House. So I'm able to get things passed, but I need company. You can't get a bill to the president's desk unless it passes the Senate as well.
Well, I'm keenly aware of this because, as you know, we are working very hard on trying to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act through the Congress, and the other bills that are supposed to expand access to the franchise. And it's been interesting having a conversation about trying to get to the number that we need to pass the bill and to have a conversation about the filibuster. Every senator counts. It's powerfully important. And of course, we all know that the district is, I think the number is 46% Black in terms of population. If it were a state, it would be the state with the largest Black population in the country, I guess, followed by Mississippi and South Carolina. What role do you believe that plays, if any, in the resistance over many years? I mean, I remember, Congresswoman, seeing a hearing about DC statehood in the 1990s, because I remember hearing Newt Gingrich, and I remember the conversation in the hearing of opponents was such thinly veiled race baiting about the district. And I have always felt that was a key part of the resistance. From your perspective, what role does the issue of race play, and the fact that this district would be a 46% Black district, what role does that play in some of the opposition? Certainly not necessarily all, but some of the opposition.
Let's see if it makes any difference that now the district is close to, according to the latest census, 50-50 Black and white. Indeed, for most of its existence, not in recent decades, but for most of its existence, the district has been majority white. And even then, it was treated unequally. So a lot of this has to do with being the District of Columbia. Now, throw race into it in the inflammatory hodgepodge of the 20th century. And yes, you do find that race has played an important role, our racial demographics, whether it was home rule or whether it is statehood.
You were sharing with me earlier also the partisan dimension, that when we talk about adding new states to the union, that there always is going to be a kind of partisan lens, and that this effort for DC statehood is in a unique position as compared to the admission of states most recently. Can you just share what that realpolitik is?
Yes, that's important to remember, because in that way, I don't think we're treated any differently from any other state who wanted, like us, in our case, to become the 51st state. No state has entered statehood by itself. Usually there is a largely Democratic state, a largely Republican state. Hawaii and Alaska were the last two to come in that way, even though they flipped not long after. We're trying to do it by ourselves, but we're getting somewhere because 54% of the American people, in a very detailed poll, broken down in many ways, supported statehood for the District of Columbia. So I'm fairly optimistic that we'll be able to do this by ourselves for the first time that any state has done so in American history.
And the overwhelming number of DC residents also want DC statehood. It looks like we're being joined by Mayor Muriel Bowser, and I'm so thrilled that you were able to join us for this conversation. We jumped in, and we're happy to bring you into this conversation and hear your perspectives as well. We can't hear you. You're on mute. You know, you got to say that for every session.
I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries.
I've had computer woes, and I'm not sure that they're over.
We will see. We will see. Well, I had just said that the overwhelming number of DC residents favor DC statehood,
Yes.
which is a distinction, I think, from other jurisdictions like Puerto Rico, where we had conversations about statehood. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we have seen support for statehood grow in DC between the referendum that we took in 2016. And I think the previous one had been done in the early 80s. And this time we saw an overwhelming 86% of Washingtonians support DC statehood, approve a constitution for the new state, approve the new state's boundaries as well. So we've had a very thoughtful process. We have an engaged electorate. The last 2 years has demonstrated for some in DC and outside of DC what not having being a state means. So we have a lot of conversation about not being represented in Congress, which is enough. But we also lack full autonomy. And we saw that with the incursion of federal officers on the streets of DC. We see that with the DC National Guard, which is actually the president's National Guard. And our Congresswoman has been on a campaign through a robust legislative package to chip away at some of those things, including giving the DC mayor control of the National Guard. But what we're talking about is lack of full autonomy, which is a principle of our republic, and lack of representation in the Congress.
So you're referring to the unrest and the protests against police violence in the summer of 2020, and the decision of President Trump to bring out troops who were occupying the streets and behaving violently against American citizens. And then, of course, January 6th, was another example. And so you're saying bringing greater urgency in the minds of people in DC to what it means not to really have autonomy, to be kind of at the mercy of these other forces.
To people in DC, but also to our fellow Americans. What the Congresswoman and I face each and every day in this discussion is most Americans don't know. They have no occasion to think about the fact that we are treated like second-class citizens. They don't know that. They just assume that we're like everybody else in the shadow of the Capitol, having our Congresswoman with a full vote and having 2 senators. So part of our challenge with our statehood efforts, Sherrilyn, is to educate our fellow Americans. And I got to hear, I know you didn't see me, but I did hear you. You raise another point. And it's not just about us. It's about perfecting the democracy for the whole country. And especially it's highlighted by this kind of 50-50 majority that exists that leaves out tax-paying Americans.
Well, I think there's no question about that. I mean, there is no other democratic country in the world where the people who live in the Capitol, don't have full rights. It's actually quite shocking. And so we now have a piece of curative legislation. It was, obviously legislation H51 in the House and now S51 in the Senate. And I wanted, I guess, beginning with you, Congresswoman, if you would kind of give us a little bit of a sketch of the bill. How would this happen? What would it look like for DC to become a state?
Well, the most important feature would be 2 senators. I get bills passed here, but I need partners in the Senate. I have found partners, but they're not from the District of Columbia. So the most important thing we would get is real partners in the Senate, rather than the very good partners we have now from other states. The bill would reduce the size of the federal district so that the federal district would just be that plot of land that we think of as the White House and the Capitol. I would call it the Capitol, but the neighborhoods of the district would be the new state, 1 through 8.
You know, I was looking, I was hoping I could find it here at what that would look like. So what the Congresswoman you're describing is that there would still be a seat of government, right? So there'd still be a district. It would be reduced in size from what it is now, and it would encompass what we think of as the seat of government. The Congress on Capitol Hill, the White House, the Supreme Court, other areas, other historic buildings. Mayor Bowser, are there more that would be contained in that?
The National Mall,
National
Mall, monuments and museums.
Now,
so everything that you think about.
I was going to say, importantly, nothing in the Constitution speaks to the size.
Well, I'm coming back to you, Congresswoman Norton, because we're going to talk lawyer to lawyer about what people's claim are some of the impediments. But I want to first get this look, Mayor Bowser. So it's the Capitol, it's Capitol Hill, it's the Supreme Court, it's the White House, it's the National Mall, it's the monuments. That would be the federal seat of government. And then the rest of the land would be ceded into the new state of the District of Columbia. Okay.
That's correct.
And so this does not.
Importantly, what I always tell people when we think about that for our fellow Americans, you lose nothing. Your nation's capital is still there. Your ability to go to the monuments and the museums and the 17 free Smithsonian's, that's still going to happen. You're still going to go to Capitol Hill to call on your lawmakers. That's still going to happen. So nothing changes for anybody.
You don't need it. You don't need any land from Maryland. You don't need any land from Virginia. This is all what is the existing district, and all it does is shrink the size of what is the seat of government, the actual federal district, to just encompass that area, and the rest would be ceded to this new state.
That's correct.
Okay, let me have a lawyer moment with my Congresswoman, who, if you all don't know, is one of the most brilliant lawyers. Was a civil rights lawyer, represented Fannie Lou Hamer when she was in law school, was the chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, law professor, longtime law professor at Georgetown. And so I'm going to take the privilege of having you here to talk a little bit about what some of the resistance has been. Some people have said that in order to create a state out of DC would require a constitutional amendment. They have suggested that that you cannot create this seat of government without amending the Constitution. There are 3 provisions at play. There's Article 1, Section 8, which is just about the district itself and that it can't be bigger than 10 square miles. There's Article 4, Section 3, which is about how states get admitted and Congress's power to do that. And then, of course, there's the 23rd Amendment, which is about electors being assigned to the District of Columbia. So very, very quickly, can you just walk us through the elements that ensure that, in your view, there is no constitutional impediment to a DC statehood?
Well, fortunately, there isn't any. Every state has been admitted by majority vote. It's all it takes. You mentioned, I think the second thing you mentioned was, you mentioned the 23rd Amendment. The
23rd Amendment is about the electors.
Let me go to that one. The district in 1960 did get electors in the Electoral College. So they would have to be eliminated. We think that would be the fastest vote you ever saw. One statehood occurred to get rid of those electors, because then we'd have double the electors. We were pleased to get them because it gave us at least some rights. But that is a 23rd Amendment problem that we think would be taken care of in my bill. I eliminate the entrance to that, but it would take a vote, frankly, of the Congress to eliminate that right that the district got in 1960. So that's the other one you named. I think there was.
Yeah, and the first one was Article 1, Section 8, which we've kind of already talked about, which is just about the fact that it couldn't be bigger than 10 square miles, but it doesn't say you couldn't reduce it to the 2 miles that would be contemplated by S51.
Precisely, we've already discussed that one.
Yeah.
That we would reduce it to the area. I think the mayor mentioned that around that people identify, frankly, with the nation's capital, the mall areas from the Capitol all the way to the monument.
You're a lifelong DC resident, and with the deep family ties we talked about at the top of this conversation, what's the benefit to people in DC? And I don't mean just the benefit of having senators and ensuring that you have representation. How do you think being a state would actually benefit the average resident of DC?
The benefit to the average resident of DC would be largely because the Congress could no more overturn the laws that their council, the Council of the District of Columbia, passes than they can overturn whatever Maryland or Nevada does. In terms of local DC, their council can pass anything it wants to, but the Congress of the United States can interdict and seek to overturn it. In fact, I spend a great deal of my time keeping that from happening. I probably spend more of my time during the appropriation period on that than on getting DC what it needs for in an appropriation. That's why it has mattered this year to be in the majority, that I haven't had to do that as much.
Mayor Bowser, can you answer that question as well to your constituents? What is the actual benefit to DC residents?
Well, I think that the Congresswoman is exactly right, that we don't have to worry about interference from people we didn't elect on matters that they would have no idea what's best for DC about. There's also the matter of our criminal justice system that is almost entirely federal right now, which means that local prosecutors, judges aren't accountable to the people of the District of Columbia. There's that. There's the matter of our offenders who are all over the country, who are coming home without the type of preparation that they need. I'll end with a very practical example that we hadn't experienced when it comes to formula funding last year, I guess now, during the pandemic. The district was not treated in the way that it's always treated for federal funds, especially during an emergency. And we were shorted $750 million. That is a very practical example because we had to make sure there are local funds that come from our taxpayers that were available for the emergency when every other state was using federal dollars. And that wouldn't happen. But in the Senate, something happened with that money getting diced up, and we got left out. So that's just a practical example that could repeat itself. This time it was the CARES Act. Maybe it's education or transportation funding the next time. And that can only happen if we are finally a state.
Let me just hone in on this for a second in the kind of comparative sense. So DC's got 700,000 residents. Are there states that have fewer residents than DC? I'm just serving up this softball.
Yes.
There
are two. Montana and Vermont have fewer.
Wyoming, I think. Maybe
Wyoming. I'm sorry,
yes.
Not Montana. They have only 500,000 people and shrinking. And Vermont is not much more. We're close in size to Delaware.
And Alaska.
So it's not that we're too small.
Okay, so that's the size. Now tell me about the taxes. The Congresswoman was alluding to this earlier about the kinds of taxes and the contribution to the federal tax coffers paid by residents of Washington, D.C.
Well, I think part of the kind of the nomenclature problem that we suffer from is when people call us the federal district, they actually think we're the federal government and we're an agency that's funded by the United States taxpayers. And that's just, it couldn't be further from the truth. We don't get anything from the federal government for the most part. We get some special security funding because we support the federal government security that any other state doesn't get. And so everything that it takes to run our city, we had a $17 billion budget this year, we raise locally. So that comes from our property, our commercial and residential property, income taxes, and sales taxes. And so we are just like every other jurisdiction, every other state, I should say, in how we take care of ourselves.
Well, on that, I'd like to add something because in a real sense, I think the district has overpaid because the district pays more federal taxes per capita than any Americans in any state or in anywhere. We pay more federal taxes than 21 states who already, of course, have statehood. The district has a AAA bond rating. So that's what I mean when I say we are overqualified for statehood.
I love that. I love that. Overqualified for statehood. That's a bumper sticker right there. So we've got the taxation representation issue. We have without representation issue. We have the size of the district. We have the lack of autonomy. We have the fact that the district has to support itself. What would be the other benefits to statehood for DC that you think, perhaps are not discussed enough, or people don't understand the way in which it would support the broader democracy? Because that's what I was trying to refer to earlier. I think it's important to understand how it will affect residents of DC, but I believe strongly this is a fight that everyone should be a part of. And they should be a part of it because we should not, if we are to be a healthy democracy, be in a situation where there are 600,000 essentially disenfranchised citizens of our country who are not fully represented. How do we get people to get on board with the idea of DC statehood as something important for them, even if they live in California, if they live in Illinois, if they live in New York?
Well, I really think that it's to our advantage that we're trying to get statehood in the era of social media. The other states, of course, the last ones were in the 1950s, were essentially relying upon what states had been relying upon for the most part, maybe with radio and TV added in. But social media enables us to reach people in new and important ways, to inform them constantly in some ways rather than other ways of the status of their own nation's capital. So I would attribute social media as a new way and an important way to spread the message. And I think it accounts for the fact that the latest poll shows that 54% of the American people now support statehood for the District of Columbia because they learned what they did not know. They were woefully ignorant. In some ways, my going on the House floor to speak didn't help because I just made them assume that I was like every other member, since most of the time I'm not speaking on statehood or even I'm speaking on bills. So I ascribe I'm thankful for social media and regard it as a very important new way to bring the American people to supporting statehood.
And I might add, Sherrilyn, that we have found it to be very important to make sure that the voting rights and voter suppression issues that are being discussed today, that statehood is always a part of that conversation, because the votes of 700,000 people are being suppressed, and they're largely Black people. And we say Black and brown, but they're largely Black people, with a growing number of brown people in our city that are also whose voices and votes are also being suppressed. So those two have got to go together, and we make the case when we look what could happen in our country. I think we also have to kind of stop talking about statehood in a fanciful way. I can't tell you the number of conversations that I have when people start off like they're literally laughing, like, oh, is this going to happen this time? Well, yes, it's going to happen this time. It's urgent that it happen this time. And the Congresswoman and I, we don't like just do things for kicks. This is serious business for our constituents. We've laid out a serious campaign to get it done. And we believe, like I believe the NAACP does, that this voting rights issue has to happen, and it has to happen now. And it's worthy of disrupting this relic called the filibuster. And when the voting rights issues are addressed, DC statehood has to be addressed as well.
No, there's no question about that. And it's interesting, Mayor Bowser, and I should also correct that we're the NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
I'm sorry,
but in this, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the NAACP in support of this issue. You know, after we made it through last year and after January 6th, just talking in our staff, you know, we have been kind of refreshing our own urgency. And obviously, you know, we work in the space of resisting voter suppression like crazy. And, you know, we're right now in litigation. We've sued Georgia, we've sued Texas, we've sued Florida. And I'm sure there will be more around their new voter suppression laws. But we've identified really DC statehood as one that is just moving to the top because, you know, as you point out, it's kind of, if you've been around long enough, it's always kind of out there as a conversation. But right now, I think the urgency is really there because I think people understand the relationship between voting representation and power in ways perhaps that they haven't since the civil rights movement, really understanding what it means to have power, what it means to be disempowered, and what it means to have people manipulate political power through deciding who can vote and who can't vote. And this may be the largest manipulation of power by having 700,000 people in the nation's capital who can't vote that is existing in the country and really requires tremendous urgency on our part. And that's part of why I was asking about how we begin to fire people up around the country on this. The Congresswoman has been at this forever. You have been at this. This should be a national issue and not a local issue. This should not be something that it falls on just the people of DC to handle, just like people come out and march against voter suppression in Georgia or Alabama or Texas, even if they don't live in those states. We want people around the country to be marching, to be active, to be engaged, and to be pushing on the issue of DC statehood, even though they don't live in the district. Because this is about American democracy, not just about your own individual and particular state. And so I'm hoping you agree with me on that. I'm sure you do.
I absolutely agree with you on it.
I wanted you to be clear that that's where kind of LDF is thinking, and to hear your thoughts on how not only we can be helpful, but others who are watching this program and who we'll be talking to in the coming months, how they can get engaged.
Well, first let me say what's unique about our country and about statehood. We are the only democracy in the world that does not grant equal rights to its own capital. How can you be a democracy when your own capital doesn't have democracy? We need to get that word around and then say that if we want to continue to lead the so-called free world, we got to free ourselves first by having a capital that is the equivalent to other capitals where the people have the same rights as the people in every other capital of a democracy.
I think that's powerful. How would we feel if you understood that, everybody in Germany could vote, but not the residents of Berlin. Everyone in France could vote, in all federal elections, but not the residents of Paris. We would think it was outrageous. And yet that's
Absolutely.
what we live with here. I'm sorry, but Mayor Bowser, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say there are other like pressing national issues, I think, too, that have a particular effect on us. And I think whatever the vehicle, if it's the abortion rights issue that's going to disrupt this filibuster, the voting rights issue that's going to disrupt it. Many in this, I'm sure you are aware that the Congress has imposed in DC what it is not able to do in many states around the country with the Hyde Amendment, which limits the ability for federal dollars to be used for abortion care. And so I think making sure that our national groups who are fighting for abortion rights see that as also a DC issue. And always we're attaching our suppressed vote and our lack of democracy to every issue that has to get through the Congress.
Okay, I think this is going to be my last question, so get ready. Let me start with you, Congresswoman. Congresswoman, we do this. It happens. We make it happen, and it happens. And now you are Senator Holmes Norton. Tell me what's the initiative what's the first bill you're going to carry? What's top of mind for you as a senator, as a United States senator?
If I'm a Senator Norton, then I've already gotten the major that I've spent my whole life trying to get. So I would have to look at what's before the Senate then. When you consider how polarized the Senate is as I speak, so it's pretty hard to know what that bill would be. But it would certainly be one that had a very special effect upon the new state, the 51st state district. And it would be called the District of
The Douglas Commonwealth.
Douglas Commonwealth.
Oh, that got my heart. Explain that. Tell everybody what that's about.
That's so important that we don't want to get rid of DC, but we want it to stand for something that's DC. Nothing could be more DC than Frederick Douglass,
yes,
who was the first person to call for equal rights for the residents of the District of Columbia, even centuries ago.
Those of you who have not visited the home of Frederick Douglass, and it's in Anacostia, I think, somewhere in South
Anacostia.
It is one of the most beautifully preserved historic homes in the district, filled with history about Frederick Douglass. Sits high on top of a hill. It's absolutely beautiful. It's reminding me I need to go back. So I love that. Douglas Commonwealth. That's beautiful. So Mayor Bowser, you're now Governor Bowser. Mm-hmm. So you had a little time to prepare. So you're Governor Bowser.
Right.
Tell me about some of your first initiatives as governor.
Well, we will be transitioning into statehood, and we know that in the history of states joining the union, that takes several years. The new governor and state legislature will negotiate with the federal government on our terms and its terms. So we'll be doing all of those things to make sure that we're setting up the state for success. We've done a lot of that planning already. You won't be surprised by that. And one component of our new constitution, I like to call it our more democracy agenda, is that our current legislature, the DC Council, will expand. So we'll have 7 new members. So one of the first things that I'll have to do is help our Board of Elections with a new election for those new members of the state legislature.
Would you explain that? Why would there be 7, an expansion beyond the 13 members of the council?
That was part of our constitutional convention and discussed throughout all 8 wards. And the consensus was we needed more people, more legislatures to handle a pretty complicated government. That the way it is now, the council members have quite a workload with committee work and oversight of $17 billion for 700,000 people. So we will have a greater representation in the legislature.
I thought you were going to tell us what you're going to do with your infrastructure dollars, assuming you get those too.
Well, I was going to bore you with my story, but the Congresswoman and I have just
the biggest. Can get out that bill.
Yes, you're going to do it. When we're doing it, you have to visit the new Frederick Douglass Bridge that connects Ward 6 and Ward 8. We were just at the Reagan National Airport that had an $800 million. It's in the middle of an $800 million renovation. Our metro system, which is heavily used by the federal government, more than most transit authorities. So we can use the bridge money, the road money, the airport's money.
That ramp into RFK Stadium. I mean, there's some things.
And the public transit money.
This is wonderful to hear. I do think it's so important for people to understand this as a broader American democracy issue, not a partisan issue, not even purely a racial issue, although we understand what the racial implications are. To the extent that it's a racial issue, it's about ensuring that we ensure that Black people have full representation in this country. But it really is about a democracy issue for our fellow citizens, and to try to get people engaged and involved, get it on the menu of voter suppression issues that people have increasingly become familiar with and are able to talk about and understand, and make sure that we keep this top of mind as a democratic priority for this country. We're asking people to call their United States senators, which they can do at 202-224-3121. Yes, 202-224-3121. Tell them this is an important issue for you. You know, often when I give out the number to be able to call your senator, people will say, oh, well, that's in another state. I don't live in a state that's doing this or that. This is a circumstance in which we're asking you, even though you do, because remember, folks in the district, they don't have a state. Okay, so they can't call their senator. You are doing this for your fellow citizens. You are calling your senators and telling your senators that you want your fellow citizens to be represented and to have equal access to the political process in this country. And you want to strengthen American democracy by supporting DC statehood, that you regard it as a matter of urgency. We need you to tell them that. We know there's a lot on the list. We know there are many issues that we're all dealing with and that we think are important, but I have been asking people to put that number in your phone. And if you want to be a more engaged citizen, it's wonderful for you to vote. It's wonderful for you to protest, but you also have to reach out to your representatives and let them hear your voices directly. So you ought to be able to call your senators every week for one issue or another. Put DC statehood in rotation. Put it in rotation and make sure that they're hearing from you. And I'm sure that you can reach out to the offices of Congresswoman Holmes Norton and Mayor Bowser to get more information about DC statehood. If there are any events coming up that you want us to know about, we are happy to amplify them. Congresswoman, you should know we will be using social media to push out this conversation. We want people to hear it and to hear you directly. And Mayor Bowser, we are happy to work with you on this issue that is a priority now for LDF as we do our voting rights work. So thank you both so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Sherrilyn, and thanks to the LDF. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Glad to be with you, Mayor, and certainly with you, Sherrilyn Ifill.
Take good care.
Bye-bye.